Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking. I'm from Richmond Green Chambers. I'm looking at a book, Running a Limited Company, 8th edition. It's from Jordan's. It's a paperback. It's a lightish book running to 300 pages, something like that. That's the back of the book there. You can see some detail and some quotes. That's the index, working backwards. You can see again very much part of the Jordan structure. You've got paragraph numbering at the sides, which is very helpful. A lot of detail, quite a lot of information. You can see, for instance, with the way in which it's structured, that the chapters start off with obviously very much an introduction. A beginning, a middle and an end is always there with most of the information. You've got some quite useful flow charts as well. The front, you've got the main contents, and then of course you've got something which is always worth reading, the preface. The book itself is light, very useful indeed, and I think extremely important for anybody who is actually running a limited company. And I would wish that many people who are running companies would read this sort of book, so they've got some idea of what in fact they're in for. And it would also save a lot of time, because there's so much nonsense which actually gets into the courts, which could have been dealt with a lot earlier had people realised some of the things, pitfalls and problems that one has to face. We've written a review which has appeared in the journals and elsewhere on the web, and we've called it this: Establishing or Managing a Limited Company. Here's the essential information you need, and that's exactly what it is. I've often been quite amazed at the number of people I meet who are running companies and have absolutely no idea really what their responsibilities are. And I think it's quite useful for them to know. The only danger is they might run a mile if they suddenly find out there's really rather a lot of information which they'd rather prefer not to know about. However, we don't want to destroy the entrepreneurial spirit. So what I'm saying here is, why set up a company? This book tells you not only why, but how, and occasionally why not, depending on your aims and circumstances. There's always your great idea, your mission statement, what you intend to do and how you're going to do it, your expertise and so on. All of these things come together for a business startup. So the book itself, this one, is aimed at lawyers, company directors, company secretaries, accountants and other officers of a private company, and it contains detailed and authoritative advice pertinent only to companies registered in England and Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. Now in its 8th edition from Jordan's, it's well established as a book. I'm sure many people have already seen it. I believe it's a reliable work of reference, because it functions admirably as an affordable, practical, plain English guide to the various requirements you may face as an officer or as a shareholder of a private company which is limited by shares. And I say that because I think there are quite a lot of books on the market. Some of them are rather more confusing than others, and it's nice to find a relatively easy to read book that is nicely and logically laid out. That's the beauty of much of Jordan's work, in fact. Now, be warned by the authors, though, that running a limited company can be a complicated business, and, we might add, not for the faint-hearted, the uninformed or the misinformed. So if by chance you fall into the latter two categories, this book can spare you many or all the pitfalls you're likely to encounter, although it does counsel you to get professional advice. And actually that is always the important thing. It doesn't matter what you do, marketing, whatever type of work you're involved in, you should actually try and get advice from specialist professionals or those with the expertise, because quite often that can save you a lot of aggro at a later stage. And it's amazing how many ships sink for a ha'porth of tar, putting it in its interesting historic perspective. So, armed with the information contained in this book, you're better able probably to know which questions to put to your advisors, saving yourself both time and money, because you do rely on other people to give you advice. The key, say the authors, and the authors, as I mentioned, are David Impey and Nick Montague. They in fact say that knowing when advice is needed before it is too late, and when it is not needed, is in fact the key to success. Usefully, the book's star rating system indicates the degree of need for professional advice, and you'll see that in the book itself, from 1 star, which is desirable, to 3 stars, which is crucial. The new edition contains much new material, taking into account the significant amendments to the Companies Act 2006, which has been described by Impey and Montague as, quote, the longest act that Parliament has ever produced. And I think members of Parliament will probably agree with that from that particular session, because it was a mammoth piece of legislation. I've actually seen the entire document. It's huge. The resulting changes, of course, which are too numerous to mention here, include codified directors' duties and other changes which affect the way shareholders of a private company make decisions, and that's again important. Remember the basic rule that the courts don't want to interfere in business agreements unless you really have to, because the whole concept of the common law, as I understand it and the way I've operated it, is that you only litigate at the last resort, because generally the courts don't want to interfere with the way you run a business, because it would, if you think about it, stifle entrepreneurial wishes and everything else. So the aim is to let you get on with it where you can. And it's quite important to note here that the wider powers for companies and their shareholders to communicate electronically are quite well contained, because we're entering that new IT era, and there are still a lot of people around who are very uncomfortable with that aspect of how to run a business. But like members of the bar and everybody else, we've all had to get used to it, and it does actually assist. It can be burdensome too, of course, but that's part of the course. Now, to the end, concerning the electronic communication of matters, look at chapter 14 of the book, because it's got a succinct summary which you'll find obviously elsewhere in the book mentioned as well, but it deals specifically with the power of the internet for marketing as well as communicating information, which is going to be very much a key, I think, to success for many companies in the future. Indeed, this book itself is a concise and effective survey of all aspects of running a company, from directors' duties through to accounting, taxation, strategy and planning, and also, of course, unfortunately, insolvency. I think it's important to know where you've got everything in one little book, because obviously these are particular compartments, if you like, within the structure of what the company's activities are, but it's useful to have that sort of information available in one source so that you can actually look at it and then delve further if you need to. Let me conclude by saying that whether you're a lawyer or a layman, if you're involved in the management of a limited company, or you're thinking of establishing one, which I think is the benefit of this book to many people, this is the book you actually need, because it will give you the idea of where you go once you've got your idea and you want to develop it. The law's stated as at the 1st of August 2013, so it's a few months old now. I'm recording this in March 2014, but I still think this is an excellent book by David Impey and Nick Montague. There it is again. You can see there are people who've got a substantial and experienced track record in this area, and I'd like to thank them all very much for producing it. If it wasn't for these books, it would make our lives a lot more difficult. I can go back 40 odd years now and remember when I first started reading law, there really was not that much in the way of information available. And today we've got a lot more, and I'm most grateful to all of you people for producing it for us, because it makes our lives a bit more complex but a lot more helpful. Thanks awfully. Bye bye.